Close your eyes for a moment and let the world around you grow quiet. Now imagine that it is the year 1250, the sun disappeared behind the hills hours ago, and you have just crossed the heavy wooden drawbridge of a medieval castle. Behind you, the gate crashes shut with a deep echo that rolls through the cold night like distant thunder. You might think that passing through those enormous stone walls means you are finally safe. But tonight, you are about to discover that the greatest enemy inside a castle is not an invading army. It is the cold. A cold so relentless that it seeps through layers of wool, crawls across the stone floors, slips beneath heavy blankets, and quietly follows you into your dreams. The castle around you is dark. Only a handful of tallow candles push back the shadows, their tiny flames dancing whenever the wind finds its way through the narrow windows. Every hallway seems endless. Every staircase disappears into darkness. Every footstep echoes as though the castle itself is listening. Tonight, there are no glowing fireplaces in every room, no soft mattresses, no warm central heating waiting at the touch of a button. Instead, you are preparing to spend the night inside a fortress built for war, not for comfort. And before morning arrives, you will learn why even kings and queens sometimes woke shivering beneath mountains of blankets, why servants often slept on bare straw, and why a single winter night inside these walls could feel far longer than the longest journey across the countryside. This is not the fairy tale castle you've seen in storybooks. This is the real Middle Ages. I'm Kushi, and this is Sleepy History Tales Official. So settle into your blankets, let your breathing slow, and together we'll step quietly through the ancient stone halls of a medieval castle, where every shadow holds a story, and every cold night whispers a piece of forgotten history. Our journey begins. Now take a slow, gentle breath, and as you settle a little deeper into your blankets, allow the world you know to fade quietly into the distance. There are no passing cars here, no glowing streetlights beyond the window, no soft hum of electricity. Instead, you find yourself standing in the heart of a medieval castle on an autumn night in the year 1250. The first thing you notice is the silence, not complete silence, but the kind that is alive. A single tallow candle flickers beside you, its small golden flame bending gently whenever a draft slips through the cracks in the thick stone walls. The light is soft and uneven, painting long shadows that slowly stretch across the ancient floor. The air carries the cool scent of damp limestone, mixed with the faint aroma of aged oak beams that have stood here for generations. Somewhere nearby, melted candle wax drips slowly onto an iron holder with quiet, patient rhythm. You pull your wool cloak a little closer. The cold wind has a way of finding every tiny opening in the castle. It whispers beneath heavy wooden doors, curls around narrow windows, and wanders through empty corridors as though it has lived here forever. In the distance, a fireplace crackles softly. Its glowing embers breathe with a slow, comforting rhythm. Every now and then, a small piece of wood settles deeper into the fire, sending a gentle shower of sparks dancing for only a moment before fading into darkness once again. Far outside the castle walls, an owl calls into the night. Its quiet voice drifts across the sleeping countryside, carried by the cool breeze over forests, fields, and rivers before reaching the castle high upon the hill for a few peaceful moments. Nothing else moves, then. A deep church bell begins to ring, one, then another. The sound rolls slowly through the valley, echoing against distant hills before fading into the stillness. The bell is not hurried. It simply reminds everyone that another quiet hour of the night has passed. Inside the castle, most people are already asleep. Guards continue their silent patrol along the walls. A stable horse shifts its weight somewhere below. A wooden beam lets out a gentle creak as the old building settles into the cold night. You breathe in slowly, and breathe out even more slowly. With every calm breath, the busy thoughts of the day become a little quieter. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing you need to do, only the peaceful sound of the wind, the gentle glow of candlelight, and the quiet company of history. Because in just a few moments, we will step beyond these silent corridors and discover what it truly felt like to spend an entire night sleeping inside one of the cold stone castles of medieval Europe, where comfort was rare, warmth was precious, and even the wealthiest nobles could never fully escape the endless chill waiting within these ancient walls. As you make your way deeper into the castle, it is easy to understand why so many people today imagine these places as grand, comfortable homes fit for kings and queens. From a distance, the castle looks magnificent. Tall towers rise toward the night sky. Massive stone walls wrap around the hill like the shell of an ancient giant. Bright banners flutter gently above the battlements whenever the wind decides to visit. To travelers approaching from miles away, the castle appears almost magical, a symbol of power, safety, and wealth. Even today, many movies and fairy tales encourage us to believe that life inside a medieval castle was luxurious. We picture elegant bedrooms with warm fireplaces, long candlelit dinners, soft feather beds, colorful tapestries, and peaceful nights of sleep. It is a comforting picture. But history quietly tells a very different story. For the people who actually lived here, castles were never designed to be comfortable. They were designed to survive war. Every thick wall you see was built to stop arrows, stones, and enemy soldiers. Comfort came second. Sometimes it was forgotten altogether. The stone surrounding you is beautiful to look at, but it has a secret. Stone remembers the cold. Throughout the long winter months, these enormous walls absorbed the freezing air day after day. Long after the afternoon sun had disappeared, the stone continued to release that cold back into every room, every hallway, and every staircase. Imagine placing your hand against the castle wall. It doesn't feel slightly cool. It feels almost icy. Even after a large fire burned for hours, much of that precious warmth disappeared into the endless stone instead of warming the people living inside. In many ways, the castle itself seemed to breathe cold air. The walls were astonishingly thick. Some measured nearly 10 feet across, and in the largest fortresses, they could be even thicker. These massive walls made the buildings incredibly strong against attack, but they also made them difficult to heat. A roaring fireplace could warm the space directly beside it. Take only a few slow steps away, and the chill returned almost immediately. Large, open halls made the problem even worse. Heat naturally rises, disappearing toward high wooden ceilings while the people below remained wrapped in layers of wool. Hopping the fire would last until morning. The windows offered little comfort either. If you've ever noticed pictures of medieval castles, you may have wondered why the windows look so small. That was no accident. Large windows created weak points that enemy archers could easily target, so castle builders kept them narrow, sometimes no wider than a person's shoulders. During the day, these tiny openings allowed only thin beams of sunlight to enter. Even at noon, many rooms remained dim. By late afternoon, shadows stretched quietly across the stone floors, and after sunset, darkness arrived quickly. There were no electric lights waiting to brighten the halls. Every bit of light came from candles, rush lamps, or fireplaces. Candles themselves were surprisingly expensive. Most ordinary people could not afford to burn several throughout the night. Even wealthy families used them carefully. As evening settled over the castle, entire sections of the building simply disappeared into darkness. Long corridors became silent tunnels of shadow. Spiral staircases vanished into blackness above. Heavy oak doors stood closed, hiding rooms that would remain unseen until sunrise. Walking through the castle after nightfall required patience. One hand often rested against the cold stone wall. The other carried a candle, carefully shielding its small flame from every wandering draft. If the candle suddenly went out, you could find yourself standing in complete darkness. Not the gentle darkness we know today, but absolute darkness. The kind where your eyes cannot find the next step, where every distant sound feels closer than it truly is, and where your imagination quietly begins filling the silence with stories. Modern homes are built to keep warmth inside. Layers of insulation hide behind our walls. Windows are sealed tightly against the weather. Heated air flows through every room with little effort. A medieval castle had none of these comforts. There was no insulation tucked inside the walls, no weatherproof glass, no central heating, only thick stone, rough timber, wool blankets, burning wood, and hope that the coming winter would not be too severe. Even during spring and autumn, many castle rooms remained surprisingly cold. Visitors often commented that the air felt damp, moisture collected on the stone. Wooden furniture stayed cool to the touch. Blankets rarely felt completely dry. The castle was constantly reminding its residents that nature always held the upper hand. Yet despite all of this, thousands of people called these castles home. Kings, queens, knights, servants, children, blacksmiths, cooks, stable boys, every one of them ended each day beneath the same heavy stone roof, listening to the same whispering wind outside. And as difficult as the cold could be, the night still held far greater challenges. Because finding a place to sleep inside the castle was only the beginning of the story. And what awaited once everyone finally lay down would surprise even the wealthiest noble. The day is finally coming to an end. The castle has grown quieter with every passing hour. The busy sounds of cooks, blacksmiths, servants, and stable workers slowly fade into the background, replaced by the gentle crackle of distant fireplaces and the soft whisper of the evening wind against the stone walls. Now, it is time to discover where the lord of the castle actually sleeps. Many people imagine a magnificent royal bedroom filled with luxury beyond imagination. The truth is a little more modest. The lord's private room was usually known as the Great Chamber. Unlike the enormous Great Hall, where meals, meetings, celebrations, and ceremonies took place throughout the day, the Great Chamber was intended to be a more peaceful and private space. Even so, by modern standards, it was far from cozy. The room was certainly larger than those used by servants, but it was still surrounded by the same cold stone walls that trapped winter's chill day and night. A few colorful tapestries often covered sections of the walls. Today we might think these beautiful woven fabrics were simply decorations, but they served another important purpose. The thick wool helped block some of the cold that radiated from the stone, creating at least a small barrier between the freezing walls and the people inside. It wasn't perfect, but every little bit of warmth mattered. Near one side of the chamber stood the bed. Unlike today's metal bed frames, medieval beds were built from sturdy oak or other hardwoods. Skilled craftsmen carved heavy wooden posts, thick rails, and sometimes decorative patterns into the frame. These beds were valuable pieces of furniture. Some families passed them down from one generation to the next. But owning a beautiful wooden bed did not automatically guarantee a comfortable night's sleep. Across the wooden frame stretched a network of tightly tied ropes. These ropes formed the base that supported the mattress. Every few days, servants needed to tighten them because over time they slowly loosened beneath the weight of the sleeper. This is believed to be one reason behind the old expression, "sleep tight." Whether the phrase truly began here is still debated by historians, but the image is certainly fitting. Loose ropes meant a sagging bed. Tight ropes made the night a little more comfortable. On top of those ropes rested the mattress. For ordinary people, mattresses were usually filled with straw. Fresh straw worked reasonably well at first. It provided a soft layer between the sleeper and the wooden frame. But straw slowly flattened over time. It collected dust. Sometimes it attracted insects. Eventually, it had to be replaced altogether. The wealthy enjoyed a different experience. Instead of straw, their mattresses might be filled with feathers gathered from geese or ducks. A feather mattress felt softer, lighter, and far more luxurious than straw. Still, even the finest feather bed could not completely protect someone from the cold air surrounding it. Blankets became incredibly important. Several heavy wool blankets were carefully layered across the bed. Some wealthy families also owned blankets lined with fur, adding another layer of insulation during the harsh winter months. Yet despite all these efforts, the cold often crept upward from beneath the bed and drifted gently across the room throughout the night. Perhaps the most recognizable feature of a noble's bed was its curtains. A medieval bed was often surrounded by thick fabric hanging from a wooden frame above. To modern eyes, these curtains might seem elegant or decorative. In reality, they served a practical purpose. When the curtains were pulled closed, they created a smaller pocket of air around the sleeper. Body heat became trapped inside this enclosed space, making the bed noticeably warmer than the open room around it. The curtains also offered something equally valuable: privacy. Castles were rarely quiet places. Servants entered with fresh water. Guards delivered messages. Attendants helped prepare clothing for the following day. Even members of noble families often shared living spaces with trusted companions or servants. A curtain offered at least the feeling of having a room within a room. Nearby, a large stone fireplace glowed quietly. Throughout the evening, servants carried in logs, carefully feeding the fire to keep the chamber warm for as long as possible. The dancing flames cast gentle golden light across the ceiling while shadows slowly drifted over the walls. For a short while, the room felt welcoming, comfortable even. But fireplaces had limits. They consumed enormous amounts of wood. As the night grew later, the fire was usually allowed to burn lower. By midnight, bright flames often gave way to glowing embers. The warmth that had filled the room slowly began to fade. The thick stone walls patiently absorbed what little heat remained. Cold air settled once again around the furniture, the floor, and even the bed itself. The Lord might sleep beneath soft feathers, wrapped in layers of wool, protected by heavy curtains and a carefully tended fire. From the outside, it sounded like luxury. Yet comfort in the Middle Ages was always relative. Compared with the servants sleeping on straw near the kitchens, the Lord lived remarkably well. Compared with a modern heated bedroom, however, even the finest chamber inside the castle would feel surprisingly cold. As the candle burns lower and the castle grows silent once again, it becomes clear that wealth could purchase beautiful furniture, carved wood, rich fabrics, and soft feathers. But it could never command the weather. It could never tell winter to stay outside the walls. And it could never stop the ancient stone from giving back the cold it had gathered all day. Yet even the richest lord could never escape the cold. While the lord of the castle slowly disappears behind the heavy curtains of his bed, hundreds of other people are still finishing the last tasks of the day. The castle never truly sleeps all at once. Someone is banking the fires so they will be easier to relight in the morning. Someone is carrying empty wooden buckets back from the well. Someone is sweeping crumbs from the great hall after the evening meal. And somewhere in the stable yard, a young servant is making one final visit to check that every horse has enough hay for the night. Only when every duty has been completed does a servant finally earn the chance to rest. But unlike the lord of the castle, there is no private chamber waiting, no carved oak bed, no feather mattress, no thick curtains to hold in precious warmth. For most servants, bedtime begins with finding whatever small space happens to be available. Some spread simple straw pallets directly across the stone floor. A straw pallet was little more than a cloth sack loosely stuffed with dry straw. When it was freshly filled, it offered a small amount of comfort. Over time, however, the straw became crushed and uneven. Sharp stalks poked through the fabric, and every movement produced a quiet rustling sound. By morning, many people woke with stiff backs and aching shoulders. Yet compared with sleeping directly on the stone floor, even a thin layer of straw felt like a luxury. Not every servant was fortunate enough to have even that. Some simply wrapped themselves in a wool blanket and lay wherever there was space. A corner near the kitchen, a passage beside the pantry, an empty section of the great hall after everyone else had gone to bed. Their sleeping place could change from one night to the next, depending on the needs of the castle. The kitchen remained one of the most popular places to sleep, especially during the colder months. Long after supper had ended, the great cooking fire still held warmth. The huge hearth slowly released gentle heat into the room, making it one of the few places where the bitter chill felt slightly less severe. The smell, however, was impossible to ignore. The air carried traces of roasted meat, onions, herbs, smoke, and yesterday's bread. Ash settled quietly over the stone floor, and cooking pots hung silently above glowing embers. For exhausted servants, none of that mattered. Warmth was worth far more than comfort. Others found themselves sleeping inside the stables. To modern ears, that may sound unpleasant. Yet for many medieval workers, the stable was actually one of the warmer buildings on the estate. The horses resting inside produced natural body heat throughout the night. The scent of hay filled the air, mixed with leather harnesses, fresh straw, and the familiar smell of hardworking animals. It was far from luxurious, but it protected people from the freezing wind blowing outside. Many stable boys preferred sleeping close to the horses anyway. If an animal became frightened, sick, or restless during the night, someone would already be there to help. Sleep itself was rarely peaceful. Servants often slept shoulder to shoulder with friends, family members, or fellow workers. Personal space was almost unknown. Blankets were shared because wool was expensive. One large blanket covering 2 or 3 people trapped far more warmth than several thin blankets spread apart. On especially cold nights, families and workers huddled together simply to stay warm until sunrise. Children curled beside their parents. Older workers slept beside younger apprentices. Everyone understood that shared warmth could make the difference between a comfortable night and a miserable one. Privacy was almost impossible to find. Someone was always nearby. You could hear another person's breathing only inches away. A sleeper might cough softly during the night. Someone else might whisper a short prayer before closing their eyes. A child could begin dreaming aloud. An older servant might snore with slow, steady rhythm until morning. These sounds became part of everyday life. Nobody expected complete silence. Nobody expected to be alone. Even changing clothes or preparing for bed happened with very little privacy. Life inside the castle was shared in almost every possible way. The wealthy had doors they could close. Most servants had only corners they could borrow, and despite the hardships, many still found small moments of comfort. A quiet conversation before sleep, a shared piece of bread, a joke whispered beside the fatting kitchen fire. Simple moments that made long days a little easier. As the candles burn lower, and one by one the castle finally grows still, every servant hopes for the same thing. A few uninterrupted hours of rest before dawn brings another day of hard work. Yet peaceful sleep was never guaranteed, because the cold was not the only thing waiting in the darkness. The nights held another danger, one so small that it could hide inside the very bed where people hoped to find comfort. Now that everyone has finally settled into their sleeping places, you might imagine that the castle has become completely silent. But medieval castles were never truly quiet. Even in the deepest hours of the night, they remained filled with small sounds that rose and faded like gentle waves. As you lie beneath your heavy wool blanket, close your eyes for a moment and simply listen. The first sound you notice is the wind. It moves slowly around the towers, slipping across the stone battlements before finding tiny cracks in old wooden shutters. Sometimes it whistles softly. Sometimes it sighs like a long, patient breath. And sometimes, when winter storms arrive, it howls through the narrow arrow slits, making the castle seem almost alive. The people who lived here became familiar with its voice. Children grew up falling asleep to it. Old servants barely noticed it anymore. It was simply another companion of the night. Far below, somewhere inside the walls, comes another sound, a quiet scratching. Then another. Tiny feet hurry across ancient beams hidden beneath the floors. Rats were common visitors in medieval castles. Where people stored grain, bread, and food supplies, rats eventually appeared. Most castles did everything they could to keep them away. Cats hunted them. Servants set simple traps. Food was carefully stored whenever possible. Yet the old stone buildings offered countless small hiding places. For many people, hearing a rat somewhere in the darkness was simply part of everyday life. Outside in the courtyard, one of the castle dogs suddenly lifts its head. Perhaps it has heard movement beyond the walls. Perhaps it is only reacting to another animal wandering through the nearby forest. A low bark breaks the silence. Another dog answers from the opposite side of the castle. Within moments, everything grows quiet once more. The guards remain calm. They have heard these sounds hundreds of times before. Not far away, inside the stable, a horse shifts its weight. The soft rustle of fresh straw fills the air. A gentle snort escapes into the cool night. Leather harnesses creak quietly as another horse settles into a more comfortable position before returning to sleep. For the stable boys resting nearby, these sounds are strangely comforting. They know each horse almost like an old friend. Every familiar movement reminds them that everything is peaceful. High above, on the castle walls, guards continue their slow patrol. Their boots strike the wooden walkways with steady rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. Every so often, one guard quietly calls to another farther along the wall, confirming that all remains well. Their voices are calm and measured. There is no urgency tonight, only duty. They carry lanterns whose small flames dance gently in the darkness, casting long shadows across the ancient stones. Hours pass slowly. Then, from somewhere beyond the castle walls, the deep voice of a church bell rolls across the countryside once again. Its sound travels through the cool night air, over sleeping villages and quiet rivers before reaching the fortress high on the hill. One slow bell, then another. Time moves differently here. There are no clocks glowing beside the bed. The bell itself reminds everyone that another hour has quietly slipped away. Sometimes the weather changes while everyone sleeps. A gentle rain begins to fall. At first, only a few drops tap softly against the wooden roofs. Soon the rhythm becomes steadier. Rainwater slides down stone walls polished by centuries of storms. The castle courtyard glistens beneath the pale moonlight. Tiny streams find their way between worn cobblestones before disappearing into old drains below. Inside, the sound becomes surprisingly peaceful. The thick walls soften the rain until it feels like a distant lullaby. As morning slowly approaches, another familiar sound joins the night. Somewhere beyond the walls, a crow calls into the darkness. Its voice is rough and unmistakable. Soon another answers from a nearby tree. Although dawn is still some time away, nature has already begun preparing for the new day. Inside the castle, the building itself continues to speak. Old wooden doors gently creak as changing temperatures cause the timber to shift. Massive beams release soft groans after carrying the weight of the roof for countless years. A loose iron hinge gives a faint squeak somewhere down a long corridor. To a modern visitor, these sounds might seem unsettling. To the people who lived here, they were completely ordinary. Every creak, every whisper of the wind, every distant hoofbeat, every barking dog, every church bell, every drop of rain. Together they formed the familiar music of castle life. And after years of hearing the very same sounds night after night, many people found them strangely comforting. The noises meant the castle was standing strong. The guards were awake. The horses were safe. The weather was passing. Morning would eventually come. Yet while these sounds filled the darkness, something else remained almost completely silent. Something far smaller. Something hidden so well that many people never noticed it until morning arrived. And then there were the tiny creatures hiding in the bedding. As the castle grows quieter and the last candle burns lower, you finally begin to relax. The wind still whispers beyond the walls. The fireplace has settled into glowing embers. Somewhere nearby, a servant softly snores beneath a shared blanket. For a brief moment, it feels as though the long day has finally come to an end. But hidden beneath the blankets, another world is just beginning to wake. Unlike wolves beyond the castle walls or soldiers marching across distant fields, these nighttime visitors are almost invisible. They make no loud footsteps. They carry no swords. And yet they followed nearly everyone, from the poorest servant to the wealthiest lord. One of the most common visitors was the humble bedbug. Bedbugs have shared human homes for thousands of years. A medieval castle, with its wooden furniture, thick mattresses, woven fabrics, and countless tiny cracks, offered them nearly perfect hiding places. Throughout the day, they remained hidden deep inside wooden bed frames, beneath straw mattresses, inside the folds of blankets, and even behind wall tapestries. Then, as darkness settled over the castle and people drifted into sleep, they quietly emerged. Their journey was slow, almost unnoticed. Most sleepers never realized they were there until morning arrived. Even the grandest bed in the great chamber was not completely safe. A feather mattress covered with fine linen looked luxurious by candlelight. But hidden deep inside the wooden frame, tiny insects could still be waiting patiently. For wealthy nobles, comfort was certainly greater. Freedom from pests was not. Servants faced even greater challenges. Their straw pallets created countless little spaces where insects could easily hide. Fresh straw helped for a short time. But after weeks or months of use, the bedding slowly became home to tiny creatures that were almost impossible to remove completely. Replacing the straw helped. Yet fresh supplies were not always available. Many people simply accepted the problem as part of daily life. Then there were fleas. Unlike bedbugs, fleas often arrived with unexpected companions. Dogs sleeping near fireplaces, castle cats wandering through kitchens, hunting hounds resting after a long day outdoors. Even horses and livestock could accidentally carry fleas close to the living quarters. Once inside, These tiny insects quickly found warm places to hide among blankets, clothing, and bedding. They were astonishingly small. A person might never actually see one. Only the occasional itch served as a quiet reminder that another tiny guest had arrived during the night. Lice were equally familiar to medieval life. Unlike today, bathing was far less frequent, especially during the colder months. Heating enough water for a full bath required enormous amounts of firewood, labor, and time. Many people instead washed their hands, faces, and exposed skin while bathing the entire body much less often. Their clothing presented another challenge. Most garments were made from wool. Wool was warm. It lasted for years. It protected people from cold weather remarkably well. But thick wool was difficult to wash properly. Soap existed, but it was expensive and often harsh. Drying heavy wool clothing during damp weather could take many days. As a result, people wore the same garments again and again. Blankets were treated much the same way. A treasured wool blanket might remain in use for years. It was carefully repaired whenever holes appeared. It was shaken outside to remove dust. It was brushed clean whenever possible. But deep cleaning as we understand it today was extremely rare. Modern people often imagine that medieval men and women simply ignored cleanliness. That picture isn't entirely fair. In fact, many people cared deeply about staying clean. Public bathhouses existed in many medieval towns. People washed with basins of water. Hands were cleaned before meals. Faces were washed each morning. Clean linen worn beneath outer clothing helped absorb sweat and could be changed more frequently than expensive wool garments. The problem was not a lack of concern. The problem was the world they lived in, without running water, without modern plumbing, without washing machines, without powerful soaps. Keeping everything perfectly clean was nearly impossible. Even the cleanest household could not completely prevent insects from appearing. People searched constantly for solutions. Bundles of sweet-smelling herbs were tucked inside bedding. Lavender, rosemary, mint, sometimes dried flowers, sometimes fragrant leaves gathered from nearby forests. Whether these plants truly discouraged insects is still debated. But they certainly made sleeping quarters smell fresher. Some believed pleasant scents purified the air itself. Others believed certain herbs carried protective powers given by nature. Throughout the Middle Ages, people also held many beliefs about illness that seem unusual today. Few understood that tiny insects could spread disease. Instead, sickness was often blamed on bad air, strange planetary alignments, or imbalances within the body. Without microscopes or modern science, the hidden world of germs remained completely invisible. People did the best they could with the knowledge available to them, and despite every effort, the tiny nighttime visitors remained. Perhaps the most surprising truth is this: the insects did not care whether someone was a king, a queen, a knight, or a kitchen servant. The same bedbugs hiding inside a rough straw mattress could also be found inside the finest carved bed in the castle. The same flea might leap from a hunting dog resting beside the fire to the expensive cloak of a visiting noble. For one quiet night, status meant very little. The smallest creatures in the castle treated everyone exactly the same. It is a gentle reminder that even within the grand stone walls of medieval Europe, nature always found a way to cross the boundaries created by wealth and power. And as uncomfortable as these tiny visitors could be, they were still not the greatest challenge of spending a winter night inside a medieval castle. Because before dawn arrived, the cold itself would once again remind every sleeping soul that the castle had one final lesson left to teach. Now imagine that the season has changed. The gentle autumn breeze has disappeared, replaced by the long, quiet grip of winter. Outside the castle walls, the countryside has fallen silent beneath a blanket of fresh snow. The forests stand perfectly still. The rivers move more slowly beneath thin sheets of ice. Every tree branch carries a delicate layer of white, sparkling softly beneath the pale light of the moon. From the tallest tower of the castle, the world appears peaceful, beautiful, even. But inside these ancient walls, winter reveals a very different story. As night settles over the fortress, the temperature begins to fall slowly, patiently, almost unnoticed at first. The enormous stone walls, which seemed so strong during summer, now become the castle's greatest challenge. Throughout the day, they have absorbed the freezing air from outside. Now, as darkness deepens, they quietly return that cold to every room within the fortress. If you were to place your hand against the stone, it would feel almost frozen. Not covered in frost, but carrying a deep, steady chill that seems to reach through your fingertips. Even standing beside a fireplace, you can still sense the cold surrounding you. It never truly disappears. It simply waits a little farther away. Outside, snowflakes continue drifting gently through the night. Some settle quietly along the castle walls. Others gather on the rooftops, softening the hard outlines of towers and battlements. By morning, every path across the courtyard may disappear beneath fresh snow. The guards walking the walls leave slow footprints behind them, each step sinking gently into the white blanket covering the stone. Sometimes the cold becomes so severe that thin layers of ice begin forming in unexpected places. Water left overnight inside wooden buckets may freeze before dawn. Moisture collecting near windows hardens into delicate crystals. Iron door handles become painfully cold to touch. Even the wooden furniture feels chilled beneath waiting hands. Inside the sleeping chambers, everyone prepares for another long winter night. Blankets become more valuable than almost anything else. One blanket is rarely enough. People carefully layer thick wool covers one upon another. Some wealthy families add heavy fur coverings made from sheepskin, rabbit, or other animals, hopping to trap every possible bit of warmth. The blankets feel wonderfully heavy, comforting, in a way, almost like a gentle embrace against the endless cold. Still, warmth escapes little by little. Nearby, the fireplace continues glowing softly. The flames dance quietly as another log settles deeper into the burning embers. For a while, the chamber feels almost pleasant. The flickering light paints golden patterns across the stone ceiling. The air closest to the fire grows warm enough for tired hands to relax. But no fire lasts forever. As the hours pass, the servants responsible for tending the hearth have long since gone to sleep. The large flames slowly become smaller. Bright orange fire gives way to glowing red embers. The comforting warmth begins to fade little by little. The room belongs to winter once again. The cold slips silently across the floor. It climbs the legs of wooden chairs. It settles beneath beds. It reaches every corner with remarkable patience. For those sleeping closest to the fireplace, the night remains bearable. For everyone else, each passing hour feels noticeably colder. This is one reason families often slept close together. Shared body warmth became one of the simplest and most effective ways to survive freezing nights. Children curled beside their parents. Brothers shared blankets. Servants rested shoulder to shoulder. Even some noble families allowed trusted attendants to remain nearby during especially harsh winters. Today, we often think of privacy as comfort. In the Middle Ages, warmth mattered much more. Sometimes another person's presence beneath the same blanket meant the difference between a restless night and a dangerous one. As you lie quietly beneath heavy wool covers, another small detail catches your attention. Your own breathing. Each slow breath rises gently into the cold air. For a brief moment, a pale cloud appears before your face. Then it disappears, another calm breath, another soft mist. The chamber is cold enough that even your breath becomes visible in the flickering candlelight. Imagine waking during the middle of the night. The room is completely still. The fire has nearly died. The candle has burned away. The only thing you can see is your own breath floating gently above the blankets before fading into darkness. To us, it might seem almost magical. To the people living here, it simply meant another bitter winter night. And yet, despite all these hardships, medieval families endured. They learned which rooms stayed slightly warmer. They patched old blankets again and again. They stacked firewood months before winter arrived. They accepted that cold was not an occasional visitor. It was a constant companion for nearly half the year. Still, there were moments of quiet beauty, snow falling beyond narrow windows, the comforting weight of thick blankets, the gentle glow of dying embers, the peaceful silence that only a winter night can bring. For a little while, the castle seemed wrapped in perfect stillness, safe, protected, hidden beneath snow and ancient stone. But perhaps the greatest fear wasn't the cold. The fire has almost disappeared. Only a few glowing embers remain, quietly breathing beneath a blanket of gray ash. Outside, snow continues to fall with gentle patience, covering the castle walls in perfect silence. Most of the people inside are asleep. Or at least, they are trying to be. Because during the Middle Ages, darkness carried a meaning very different from what it does today. For us, night is often peaceful. A simple flip of a switch fills a room with light. We know that locked doors, streetlights, and modern cities continue working while we sleep. But in the year 1250, darkness belonged to the unknown. Once the final candle was extinguished, the world beyond its tiny circle of light simply disappeared. Without moonlight, even the castle courtyard could become almost impossible to see. Every doorway became a shadow. Every staircase seemed deeper. Every distant sound invited another question. What was that? Many medieval people believed the night belonged not only to wild animals, but also to unseen spirits. It is important to remember that the Middle Ages were deeply shaped by faith, folklore, and local traditions. People prayed daily. They attended church regularly. At the same time, stories passed from one generation to another spoke of mysterious beings that wandered after sunset. Some believed restless souls remained near the places where they had died. Others whispered about spirits that traveled lonely roads, abandoned ruins, and forgotten forests once darkness covered the land. To modern ears, these stories sound like legends. But to many people living centuries ago, they felt entirely possible. Imagine walking alone through one of the castle corridors. Your candle burns softly. The walls stretch endlessly on both sides. A draft suddenly passes through the hallway, causing the flame to flicker. For just a moment, the shadows seem to move. Was it only the candlelight, or was someone standing farther down the passage? Most likely. It was nothing at all. Yet the human imagination has always been wonderfully creative, especially in places where light is scarce and silence is deep. Even educated nobles sometimes carried small charms or religious symbols believed to offer protection during the night. Wooden crosses hung near beds. Short evening prayers were spoken before sleep, not because every person expected danger, but because hope itself offered comfort. Outside the castle walls, another concern waited patiently. The forests surrounding medieval Europe were far larger than many we know today. Dense woods stretched for miles across hills and valleys. Within those forests lived wolves. During winter, when food became scarce, hungry packs sometimes wandered closer to villages and farms. Most wolves naturally avoided people. They feared humans far more than humans feared them. Still, hearing a distant howl echo through a snowy valley was enough to remind everyone that the wilderness remained close. The sound carried surprisingly far through the cold night air, long, low, almost haunting. Children listening from inside the castle often pulled their blankets a little tighter. Adults simply paused for a moment before returning to sleep. The castle walls had been built precisely for nights like these. They offered protection not only from armies, but also from the uncertainties waiting beyond the gates. Yet perhaps the greatest fear was not wild animals. It was the possibility of another army appearing without warning. Europe during the Middle Ages was rarely free from conflict for very long. Neighboring lords argued over land. Kings fought for power. Castles existed because danger sometimes arrived unexpectedly. That is why the night guards never truly rested. While everyone else slept, they slowly walked along the battlements above, lantern in one hand, spear in the other. Their eyes searched the darkness beyond the walls. Most nights were wonderfully uneventful. Hours passed with nothing more exciting than falling snow or drifting clouds. But every guard understood that vigilance itself kept the castle safe. If danger ever appeared, speed mattered. Many castles developed simple alarm systems. A large bell might be rung. A warning horn could echo across the valley. Sometimes guards shouted from tower to tower, carrying urgent messages through the darkness. Within moments, sleeping soldiers would rise from their beds. Servants would hurry to secure heavy gates. Torches would burst into life across the walls. Fortunately, such nights were uncommon. Most alarms were never needed. And yet their very existence reminded everyone that peace could never be taken completely for granted. Alongside these practical fears lived countless smaller superstitions. Some travelers refused to whistle after sunset. believing it invited unwanted spirits. Others avoided certain crossroads at night because local stories claimed mysterious figures wandered there until dawn. A few believed that hearing an unexplained knock when no one stood outside was an omen best ignored. These beliefs varied from village to village. Some disappeared with time, others survived for centuries. Whether true or not mattered less than the comfort they offered. Stories helped people explain a world that often felt uncertain, without weather forecasts, without scientific explanations, without electric lights. The unknown naturally became filled with imagination. Perhaps that is one reason medieval nights continue to fascinate us today. They remind us that every generation has searched for answers whenever darkness hides what lies beyond our sight. As you rest beneath your blankets, listening to the distant wind and the quiet footsteps of the guards above, you begin to understand something gentle about life inside these ancient walls. People were not so different from us. They hoped for peaceful mornings. They worried about those they loved. They found comfort in familiar voices, warm fires, quiet prayers, and simple routines. The shadows around them may have been deeper, but the human heart remained very much the same. And then, slowly, the eastern sky begins preparing for its first hint of morning, bringing with it a calm that no candle could ever match, very slowly, almost so gently that no one notices at first. The long medieval night begins to fade. Beyond the castle walls, the darkness softens into shades of deep blue and silver. The stars that watched over the fortress throughout the night quietly disappear, one by one, as the first hint of dawn rises along the eastern horizon. The snow-covered fields seem to glow beneath the gentle morning light. The forests, silent only moments ago, begin to awaken. A peaceful stillness lingers over the countryside, as though the entire world is taking one slow, quiet breath before another day begins. Inside the castle, most people are still asleep. The great halls remain empty. The candles have long since burned away. Only the faint red glow of dying embers can still be seen inside the enormous fireplaces. The cold has settled everywhere. The stone floors remain icy beneath bare feet. The walls continue to hold the chill gathered during the long winter night. Yet something has changed. The darkness no longer feels endless. A pale ribbon of sunlight slowly slips through the narrow windows, stretching across the ancient stone floor like a silent promise that morning has finally arrived. Then, the church bell rings. One slow, deep note rolls across the valley. Another follows. The familiar sound echoes from village to village before reaching the castle high upon its hill. For generations, these bells marked the rhythm of daily life. They welcomed the morning. They reminded people of prayer. They signaled that another day of work was ready to begin. Inside the castle, the first signs of life slowly appear. A servant opens a heavy wooden door with a gentle creak. The sound seems unusually loud after so many quiet hours. Another servant carefully kneels beside the great fireplace. The ashes are gently pushed aside. Hidden beneath them, tiny orange embers still glow faintly. With practiced hands, dry kindling is placed carefully above them. A few slow breaths, a little patience. And suddenly, a tiny flame appears once again, small at first, then growing steadily. Soon, the familiar crackling sound fills the room, bringing warmth back into the silent hall. Every morning, this simple task was one of the first responsibilities inside the castle. Without fire, there could be no warm meals, no heated rooms, no freshly baked bread, no comfort against the bitter winter air. As the flames slowly grow stronger, their golden light dances across the stone walls exactly as it did yesterday, and the day before that, and countless mornings before. Outside, the first rooster announces the arrival of dawn. Its clear call carries across the snowy courtyard. Moments later, another rooster answers from a nearby village. The peaceful chorus spreads across the countryside, reminding everyone that night has finally released its gentle hold. The horses inside the stable begin to stir. One stretches its neck. Another stamps softly against the straw-covered floor. The dogs guarding the courtyard slowly rise from their sleeping places, shaking away the frost that settled upon their thick coats during the night. In the kitchens, cooks quietly begin preparing for another long day. Water is carried from the well. Fresh bread dough is mixed. Iron pots are placed above the growing fire. The comforting smell of wood smoke soon drifts through the corridors once again. Servants gather bundles of firewood. Children rub sleep from their eyes. Guards finishing their long night watch exchange quiet greetings with those beginning the morning shift. Life inside the castle returns with gentle rhythm. Almost nothing changes. And yet, everything begins again. The Lord rises from his heavy bed. The servants roll up their straw pallets. The blacksmith prepares his tools. The stable boys check every horse. The cooks prepare the morning meal. Each person carries responsibilities that have repeated themselves countless times before. For the people living here, this was not history. It was simply life. They never imagined that hundreds of years later, people across the world would wonder what it truly felt like to spend a single cold night inside their stone fortress to them. The frozen walls, the crackling fireplaces, the heavy blankets, the church bells, the distant wolves, and the endless winter mornings were all completely ordinary. Perhaps that is one of history's quietest lessons. The moments that seem ordinary while we are living them often become the most extraordinary stories for future generations. As we look back across nearly 8 centuries, it becomes easier to see that medieval life was neither a fairy tale nor an endless nightmare. It was something much more human. It was filled with hardship and comfort, cold and warmth, fear and hope, long nights and beautiful mornings. People laughed together, worked together, prayed together. Shared meals, blankets, and stories beside the fire. They dreamed of peaceful tomorrows, just as we do today. Although the castle walls were built from cold stone, the lives lived within them were filled with the same quiet hopes that continue to connect every generation. And now, as the morning sun gently rises above the ancient towers, casting its warm golden light across the snow-covered rooftops, our peaceful journey through one medieval night slowly comes to an end. The castle awakens. Another ordinary day begins, and somewhere, deep within those ancient walls, history quietly continues to whisper its timeless stories. As our journey quietly comes to an end, take one more slow, gentle breath, and allow the ancient castle to slowly fade into the distance. The snow continues to rest upon its weathered towers. The morning fire burns a little brighter. The church bells have welcomed a new day, and the people within those cold stone walls have returned to their ordinary lives. Never knowing that, centuries later, we would pause for a little while to remember them. History often tells us about great battles, powerful kings, and famous queens. But sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest. The story of a single winter night, a flickering candle, a warm blanket shared between family members, the comforting crackle of a dying fire, and the simple hope that tomorrow's sunrise will arrive safely. Perhaps that is what makes history so beautiful. It reminds us that although the world has changed beyond imagination, the people who came before us wished for many of the very same things we do today: warmth, peace, home, rest, and another chance to greet the morning. If this peaceful journey helped you unwind after a long day, or if these quiet stories kept you company as you settled into your blankets, I would truly love to have you with us again. Please consider subscribing to Sleepy History Tales Official, where every week we gently wander through forgotten castles, ancient kingdoms, mysterious civilizations, and the peaceful corners of history that are often left untold. Our little community is growing one quiet story at a time, and there's always a place here waiting for you. I'm Kushi, and it has been a pleasure sharing this peaceful evening with you. Thank you for spending part of your night here. Now, let your eyes grow a little heavier. Let your breathing become slow and steady. Allow the worries of today to drift away like snowflakes disappearing into the morning light. May your dreams be peaceful. May your heart be calm. And may tomorrow greet you with warmth and kindness. Until our next journey through history, sleep well, dream peacefully, and goodbye for now.